Hey guys, we're just going to be starting our last unit here with a discussion of some of the human body systems. So we're making our way back into life science again. These are 7th grade units. And we're going to talk a little bit about the circulatory system this week. So the human body is made of organs which work together and they form organ systems, and these organ systems, such as the circulatory system, the nervous system, digestive system, those systems work together to help our bodies function, to help keep us alive, allow us to do the things that we do. And so we're going to talk about a couple of those systems here. So the circulatory system is the first. So the circulatory system consists of our heart and our blood vessels all working together. And so the purpose of the circulatory system, its function, we would say, is to deliver things throughout our body. That's what our heart and our blood does. So it delivers things to the cells of our body, things like food, nutrients, okay, oxygen. These are things that our cells need to live. And it's our circulatory system that delivers those things. The other thing that it does is it removes waste products from our cells. As our cells are working and functioning, they produce waste, things like carbon dioxide and other waste. And those waste products need to be removed from those cells and sort of disposed of, gotten rid of. And so the circulatory system sort of does both of those roles. You kind of think of it as, to your house, a grocery delivery service on one side, and also a waste removal, garbage removal on the other side. And the circulatory system sort of provides both of those functions. And so we're going to start by talking a little bit about the heart, important organ, obviously, of the circulatory system. We're going to sort of discuss the heart, what the different parts are, how blood flows through the circulatory system, because this is important in understanding how our circulatory system functions. So we're going to sort of build this up. We're going to start with a simplified model of the circulatory system, the heart, and to give us an idea about the flow of blood through these various parts. Okay. So what you see here is this big box in the center of the screen represents the heart. Humans and other mammals have a 4-chambered heart. And you can see there's 1 chamber, 2 chamber, 3 chamber, 4 chamber. So that's a 4-chambered heart. Okay. The upper chambers here are called the atria. The lower chambers are the ventricles. So we're going to sort of start in the right side of the heart. So our heart has a right side and a left side. And the right side of the heart, okay, is the side that is going to collect the blood that's all coming from different parts of the body and collect it all in this right atrium. Now, you'll notice when you look at your screen, you might say, well, why is the right side on the left side of my notes? What's going on there? Well, if you were to take and hold up your notes, okay, to your body, when we talk about anatomy, we talk about it as if it's in a person's body, okay? So this is my right hand, okay, to me, but when you look at it on your screen, it's on the left. This is my left hand. Okay, but when you're looking at me, it's on your right side. So we talk about anatomy as if this organ were in my body. So this organ is in my body, okay? And so my right atrium is on my right side, my left atrium is on my left side. But when you're looking at me, it appears reversed. So that's why the anatomy might look a little strange at first. So the right side of the heart is the side that collects blood that came from the various parts of your body. So I'll use myself as an example. So blood coming from my brain right now, and my head and my arms, and from my legs and my torso. It's all coming up and collecting in the right side of my heart. And this blood, because it came from all the parts of it's already sort of done its job. It's already given up oxygen. It's delivered the oxygen and the nutrients to all my cells. It's coming back to my heart. We call that type of blood deoxygenated blood. It's already given up its oxygen. So that blood comes into the right side of the heart. That blood is low in oxygen. It's high in carbon dioxide because when it was in my brain, it was taking away carbon dioxide waste from those cells. Now it's coming back into my heart. From there, the blood goes into the right ventricle. The ventricles are pumping chambers. So the atrium are entryways where blood collects. The ventricles are pumping chambers. So then the blood goes to the right ventricle, which is going to then pump that blood to the lungs, which would make sense because what does this blood need? Well, it's low in oxygen at this point, so it needs to gain oxygen. It's going to do that in the lungs. This blood is high in waste, carbon dioxide. In the lungs is where it's going to be able to get rid of that waste. So that blood coming from the right side of the heart goes to the lungs. In the lungs, it changes. When that blood gets to the lungs, it releases that carbon dioxide. That's what we exhale. At the same time, it's going to be absorbing oxygen from the air that we're breathing in. So this new blood is now high in oxygen. It's low in carbon dioxide. It's sort of recharged. And it's going to go back to the heart again. But this time it's going to the left side of the heart. The left side of the heart is the side that deals with oxygenated blood. So that blood comes into the left atrium. That blood is high in oxygen. It's low in carbon dioxide. From the atrium, it gets passed into the ventricle on the left side. And that ventricle is going to pump that blood through arteries to all the various parts of the body. You know, when we say body here, we could mean cells in your fingers or your intestine or your brain or your foot. Okay, so these are, when we say body, we're just talking about general, any cell in your body. So that blood's getting pumped out to your body cells, and when it reaches those cells, it's going to give them the oxygen that it's carrying. Okay, it's going to deliver that oxygen to the cells of the body. It's going to deliver those nutrients as well. It's also going to take their waste to remove it, carbon dioxide, other waste. And then it's going to return back to the right side of the heart. And this process will repeat over and over again. So we have this pattern. Go right side of the heart to the lungs, to the left side of the heart, to the body, to the right side of the heart, to the lungs, left side of the heart, to the body. Repeated over and over again. Okay. The right side is dealing with this deoxygenated blood. The left side is dealing with oxygenated blood. And in the lungs and in the body is where the exchange happens. Okay. So let's look at a somewhat more realistic version of the heart. So we're sort of talking about the same idea, but now we're looking at the heart in a little bit more accurate presentation. It's a model that is still simplified from the actual anatomy of the heart, but a little more accurate and realistic than the previous boxes that we looked at. And the other thing I'll mention here is, we talked about oxygenated, deoxygenated blood. And we have sort of traditional colors that we use to represent different types of blood. We often will use red to represent oxygenated blood and blue to represent deoxygenated blood. But there's a common misconception. Deoxygenated blood is not really blue. Okay? If you were able to look inside of your veins and look at deoxygenated blood, it would not be blue. Okay, it's dark red, maybe edging towards purple, and oxygenated blood is bright red. That when you have a cut or something, you see yourself bleeding, that bright red blood is oxygenated blood. But keeping these colors blue and red helps us to sort of understand the process. But I do want to make sure you know that deoxygenated blood is not actually blue. Okay, so let's again look at the overall pattern of the flow of blood into our bodies. Now, we have different types of blood vessels. We'll be talking about them in more detail in a couple minutes, but just so that you know, arteries are blood vessels that bring blood away from the heart. You can remember that A in artery goes with A for away from the heart. So any blood vessel leaving the heart is an artery. Any blood vessel coming to the heart is a vein. Okay, so let's name the chambers of the heart. We have the right atrium. Remember, an atrium is an entryway. The right ventricle. The ventricle is a pumping chamber. We have a left atrium and the left ventricle. 4 chambers of the heart. So, the blood that's coming into the heart from the various parts of the body, as we just said, it enters into the right atrium. We're using blue because this blood is deoxygenated. From there, it passes into the right ventricle. Now, it passes through these structures that are called valves. They're sort of like one-way doors, and they prevent blood from flowing in the wrong direction. So the blood comes into the right atrium, gets moved through a valve into the right ventricle, and then it gets pumped. And it goes through an artery. Again, this is going away from the heart, so it's an artery. And this blood, as we mentioned before, this blood is headed to the lungs. The blood vessels that bring blood to and from the lungs have a special name. The word pulmonary means having to do with the lungs. So the pulmonary artery brings blood away from the heart and it's bringing it to the lungs. The word pulmonary means lungs. And this may be familiar if you know what CPR is. You know, CPR, a life-saving tool that people can perform. It stands for cardio pulmonary resuscitation. Cardio meaning the heart. So when you imagine CPR, if you've ever been trained in CPR, chest compressions, when you're pressing on a person's chest, that's pumping their heart. It's compressing their heart manually. That's the cardiac heart. Pulmonary, having to do with the lungs. When you're giving a person rescue breathing to inflate their lungs, that's the pulmonary part. So this pulmonary artery takes the blood, sends it out to the lungs, where it can be recharged. It can give up its waste products. It can obtain oxygen. Again, that blood that comes from the lungs comes back to the heart, but to the other side. Comes into the left atrium through a blood vessel called the pulmonary vein. Again, pulmonary having to do with the lungs, vein because it's coming to the heart. Goes through a valve into the left ventricle, and then it gets pumped out, heading to all the various parts of the body. This main blood vessel, this artery that's leading out of the left ventricle, is called the aorta. It's the largest artery in the body. And the aorta branches off to bring the blood to various parts. Okay, so now we're at really a drawing of an actual heart. So this is what a human heart looks like. Okay, so again, it's not as sort of neat and boxy as the other models, but we can still use this model and to understand sort of how blood flow happens in an actual heart. So let's look at the chamber. So the heart is kind of tilted a little bit, and you can see that. So we still have our 4 chambers. We have the right atrium is here. We have the right ventricle. We have the left atrium, and then we have the left ventricle. So those are the 4 chambers. we'll start in the same place we started our other diagrams. So the blood that is coming from the body enters into the right atrium, and it comes through these large veins. These veins are called the vena cava. And this blood that's coming from above, that would be the blood coming from the upper parts of the body, from the arms, from the head, the brain. That blood comes down this vein. This vein would be bringing blood from the lower parts of the body, from the torso, from the legs. But it all enters into this right atrium. So these two veins are called the vena cava. That blood goes then into the right ventricle, which contracts, squeezing the blood out, headed through this artery. That's the pulmonary artery. And it branches off. One goes to the left side of the body, one goes to the right side. And that's because we have two lungs. So this branch of the pulmonary artery would be heading to the left lung. This branch would be heading to the right lung. That blood comes back to the heart through the pulmonary veins, which empty out into the left atrium. Again, this blood is now oxygenated. Gets pumped into the left ventricle, and then out through the aorta. The aorta has these branches that lead to the left side of the body, the left arm, and up to the brain and the head and to the right arm. The aorta then loops around. It goes behind the heart and then down. This leads to the lower parts of the body. So it's kind of like a highway system that runs all throughout the body, allowing for nutrients and oxygen to be delivered to all parts of the body. So that's the anatomy of the human heart and how our circulatory system works. So once that blood leaves the heart, it's moving through tubes, basically. These tubes we call vessels, our blood vessels. And we have over 60,000 miles of blood vessels in our body. Okay, so there's a huge amount, because basically every cell in our body needs to be pretty close to blood vessels. So we talked a little bit already about arteries and veins. Arteries are the blood vessels that bring blood away from the heart. Now this blood in the arteries, it's under high pressure, because as our ventricles contract, they force blood into the arteries under high pressure. That blood is typically oxygenated. However, there's an exception, and that's the pulmonary artery, because that's carrying the blood to the lungs. Arteries are stretchy or elastic, that they're flexible. And you can actually, if you feel along the side of your neck, if you put two fingers on the side of your neck, slide them towards the front of your throat and press in a little bit, you'll get to a little sort of indentation here on the side. If you press in there a little bit, you'll start to feel your pulse. Okay, what you're feeling there, what you're touching are your carotid artery, which brings blood up here to the left side of your head. And when you put your fingers near there, every time your heart beats and forces blood into that artery, it stretches a little bit. And that's what you're feeling when you feel your pulse. You're feeling the stretching of that artery every time your heart beats. So as these arteries head out from your heart, they start branching off, getting smaller and smaller to reach all the various places on your body. And eventually they get so small, so tiny, that the blood cells, which we'll talk about in a minute, have to only go through single file. That's how narrow these blood vessels become. And when they get that small, we call them capillaries. So capillaries are another type of blood vessel. They're very, very thin. They're only one cell thick. And once the blood gets to these capillaries, this is where diffusion happens. This is where oxygen can move out of our blood and into our body cells. It's where nutrients can diffuse out of our blood into our body cells. It's where waste products from our body cells can diffuse into the blood. So the capillaries are where these substances are actually moving between our blood and our body cells. Basically, every tissue in our body has a network of these capillaries. They're so narrow, blood cells are moving through one at a time. And as they're moving through this capillary, that's when they're giving up their nutrients and oxygen and taking in waste products. After the blood moves through these capillaries, then it starts heading back to the heart. When it heads back to the heart, as we've learned, it's coming through veins. So veins bring this blood back to the heart. Most of them are carrying deoxygenated blood. They've already given up the oxygen and nutrients to the body cells. The exception's the pulmonary vein. And as these veins start making their way back to the heart, they start merging together, get larger. And veins actually have in them these tiny little valves, sort of one-way doors. Because in the arteries, there was high pressure from the heart forcing the blood through the arteries. So that high pressure keeps blood going one way. But in the veins, there's much lower pressure. And so in the veins, to prevent blood from accidentally flowing backwards, there are these valves that allow the blood to only move forward, only move in one direction. So, although we talk about these different blood vessels as categories, they're actually all linked together. Okay, arteries become split off, become narrower and narrower, eventually they become capillaries. And then those tiny little capillaries start merging together and they form veins. This is blood that's leaving the heart, going to different tissues, and you can see the underlying tissue, the cells there, and then comes back, headed back to the heart. So arteries, capillaries, and veins are all interconnected to allow the circulatory system to actually deliver materials that need to be delivered and to remove waste products. So pause this for a minute, pause this presentation, and go ahead and read over these questions and see now, based on what we've been talking about, if you are able to answer these questions. What type of blood vessel is being described? After you've done that, I'll go over the answers. So, which blood vessel has the thickest, most muscular walls? That's an artery. Which blood vessel has walls that are just a single cell thick? That's a capillary. Blood vessels that carry the blood to the heart? Vein. Carry blood away from the heart? Remember, away, that's an artery. Where exchange happens of nutrients, carbon dioxide, and oxygen, that happens in the capillaries. Which has high oxygen blood, usually arteries, but remember there's an exception, pulmonary artery. Highest nutrients, again, arteries. They have the blood with the highest nutrient levels. And it's diffusion that allows materials to move back and forth from our blood into those and out of those body cells. So, what exactly is blood? It's not just a red liquid. It's actually a mixture of several things. So blood is a mixture of plasma, which is a liquid, basically, which carries with it several different types of cells. So the plasma is the liquid portion of our blood. It's actually more than half of our blood. 55% of our blood is actually this plasma. If you were to separate the different parts of the blood, it would have this yellowish color. And this is where the nutrients of that our blood carries are dissolved. Okay, Okay, things like glucose and amino acids and fatty acids and vitamins and minerals, they're dissolved in this liquid plasma. Along with that plasma in our blood are cells. Red blood cells are one type of cell that's in our blood. They are shaped like these discs, almost like a bagel, but without a hole in it. And these red blood cells contain a special protein called hemoglobin. And this hemoglobin is actually able to sort of latch on to oxygen, and that's how our blood carries that oxygen. Latches on the hemoglobin, okay, and then transports it to the cells. Hemoglobin is a protein that has iron at the middle. This is why we need iron in our diet. And if a person doesn't get enough iron, they might be anemic. And it means that their blood's not carrying enough oxygen because they don't have enough iron. Also in our blood are white blood cells. White blood cells are our body's defense system, our immune system, which fights off pathogens, infections, viruses, bacteria. And if we are sick, if we get, say, an ear infection, our body's circulatory system, immune system, ramps up the production of these white blood cells to help defend us against this invasion of a pathogen. They're larger typically than red blood cells, fewer in number usually. And then the other part of our blood are their platelets. Platelets are molecules which allow for our blood to clot. Now, sometimes people get confused. Is it good if our blood clots? Well, sometimes. It depends on the situation. So if you get a cut, okay, what happens is these platelets start to clump together once they're activated at a sign of damage to a blood vessel. They start to clump together and they sort of form a mesh that blocks the damage to the blood vessel, allowing us to stop bleeding. Okay, so blood clotting is important when we have damage to our circulatory system. If those blood clots, however, form inside of our blood vessels when they shouldn't, they can circulate around our circulatory system, and they could get stuck and cut off the flow of blood to a part of the body. And that would be an example of when blood clotting is harmful. Heart disease is one of the leading causes of death in the United States. About 25% of all deaths in the United States are caused by heart disease. Okay? Our heart itself is a muscle that works constantly, okay, that contracts once every second or so throughout our entire lifetime. And so it must have a constant supply of blood itself. The way the heart muscle gets oxygen and nutrients it needs to work are through arteries that are called coronary arteries. These arteries, which are shown in this diagram, feed our heart oxygen. If these arteries get blocked, that can lead to serious consequences. Because if those arteries become blocked, our heart muscle doesn't have enough oxygen and it stops working. And if our heart stops working, the other cells of our body are not going to get a source of oxygen, and cells cannot survive very long without oxygen. That heart disease can be caused by atherosclerosis, the thickening of the arteries due to the buildup of things like cholesterol and other fatty substances. They can lead to the narrowing of those arteries, restricting the flow of blood. Yeah. And that can lead to chest pain. It can lead to a heart attack when the heart does not have enough oxygen to function. There are other types of heart disease, such as high blood pressure, things like that, which can, again, lead to damage to blood vessels and damage to other tissues of the body. Okay. when a person has a blockage in a coronary artery such as this, that's when they may have a device called a stent put in to sort of open up that area where there's a blockage. They might have bypass surgery when the doctor sort of inserts another blood vessel to go around a blockage. So these are different types of treatments that people can have when they have serious heart disease. So this is our discussion of the circulatory system. It's pretty brief, but it gives you a general overview of the circulatory system, and it's an important system for you to know about because obviously it's crucial to our survival, and diseases of the circulatory system can be very dangerous and are very common. Okay, so that's all for today. I hope that you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you later on.